Hey guys, and welcome back to another Shadow Priest Mythic Plus commentary video. Today we're going to be looking at a 15 Sanguine Depths that we two-chested, where I did 9.1k overall DPS, right? Which is kind of fitting because that's what patch we're in right now, 9.1. So isn't that kind of ironic? So anyway, before we get started, I'm just going to talk about the talents real quick. Most people should know by now if you do any amount of Mythic Plus. But if you don't know, on high fortified keys or fortified weeks in general, for most dungeons, this is what you're going to want to play if you're a Night Phase Shadow Priest like me. Karain offers First Strike, which gives you a bunch of crit, which means that your Searing Nightmare casts and your Shadow Crash casts are going to do more damage, right? Because they're more likely to crit. And then you'll run Ancient Madness for that same reason, where anytime you get in Void Form, you get a bunch of crit. So this is like the ideal talent setup for any dungeon where you're gonna have really big pulls, so that you can get a lot of value out of Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash, and it's fortified, right? So you don't need a ton of boss damage and stuff like that, right? So Sanguine Depths is a really good one for this. This build, I think, performs really, really well in Sanguine Depths on these fortified weeks, as you can kind of see by this high overall damage. But you could potentially swap some of this stuff out for other stuff. Like if this was a tyrannical week, for instance, you wouldn't want to run this build because it's lacking on boss damage pretty heavily. You might run something like Hungering Void, swap Karain for Naya, and then even depending on how badly you're hurting for single target damage, you might swap Searing Nightmare for Misery and Shadow Crash for Auspicious Spirits, and then that would be like your single target build for this dungeon. But I think even on tyrannical weeks, you're going to be hard pressed to get a lot of damage out of that build, or comparable damage to the amount that you get from this build. But anyway, that's enough of the talk of the talents and everything. This key, I will mention, the reason I ran this build is because this week was the week that the Mythic Sanctum of Domination opened up. So it was a fortified, inspiring, grievous, tormented week, right? So inspiring is not a boss mechanic. It's going to be a trash thing, and grievous is also a trash thing, and it's fortified. So you don't really have to worry too much about having boss damage. So let's go ahead and start the key. And I'll talk about some stuff as it happens. There's a couple cool things that I can point out. Oh, I'll pause. Oh, actually, I missed it just barely. Let's go back just a tad, because I brought up my character sheet just so you guys could see. When we did this key, I had not finished my Unholy Set bonus. I am playing 2 DPS shards right now. So I'm 236 equipped with 238 in bags, and then I've got I swapped my legendary, my Shadow Flame Prism, from my head to my hands, and it's rank 5, right? And then I've got the waste that you buy from the Death's Advance vendor, and I've got a shard of Beck, I think it is. It's the blood DPS shard. I've got one of those in there, and then I've got the shoulders from Mythic the 9, I believe, and I've got the Shard of D's in there. So the Shard of D's is way more powerful than the Shard of Beck. So if you only have one domination socket and you have both of those shards, the first DPS shard you should be using is the Unholy Shard, the Shard of D's, right? But as soon as I get the helmet from Remnant of Ner'zhul or from Sylvanas, then I'll have my Unholy Set finished. The reason I bring this up is because at the time of making this video, pretty much nobody has their Unholy Set bonus finished. We're all like low 230s item level, right? And by the end of this season, everyone's going to be 250, 252, 254, whatever item level. And they're all going to have their Unholy Set bonuses, and it's all going to be upgraded and everything. So 9.1k overall is a lot right now, and it will be very small by the end of the season. So if you're watching this video months into 9.1, just know that don't think that this is like tiny and I'm really bad, right? This is pretty good for the time that I did it, right? in the future, you're going to see stuff like 16k, 17k, maybe from really, really geared Shadow Priests at the end of the season. So that's just a forewarning to you future folk. And then, yeah, let's go ahead and start the video. Sorry for taking so long to get into it, but now we are into it. So the way I like to prepare for this first pull, there's going to be there's this pack right here and a pack back there, and they're both going to be pulled on top of the Venthyr Lantern. So what I do is I start putting a couple Vampiric Touches out. I faded right there so that I can stop, so I won't generate threat, right? And then as we go into this pull, I'm going to just pop. There's like, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 targets. 4 are rare, or elites, I mean. And as this animate weapon cast continues, there will be more targets. So at 8 targets, you're just going to ignore your dots. You're not going to worry about putting Vampiric Touch on stuff other than as it's getting pulled together, right? And then you're mostly going to be going for Searing Nightmare spam. So I put Vampiric Touch on a couple of them, and now that everything's stacked up, I want to blast, right? So I'm going to hit my Void form. I'm going to pop my Mindbender, hopefully. As soon as I'm in Void form, I'm going to cast a Shadow Crash, so I get hopefully a crit from it because of Ancient Madness, right? I'm going to use my Ruby. I'm going to use my Power Infusion. I'm going to pop all my cooldowns right here, except for Fey Guardians. I should hold on to that until later on. But this pull goes wrong for us because, as you'll see, this Animate Weapons cast got off, and so it's starting to animate these weapons, and because of that, I pick up a lot of threat on them. I Psychic Scream them away. I almost died right there. I almost die again. Actually, if we go back real quick, I'm pretty sure I was like under 100 HP right there. So this is the first time I dropped really low, 4.2k. And then this is I was at 518 HP. That is kind of an oh crap moment, right? So I didn't have my Fade up. Desperate Prayer would have been good right there. I choose to Disperse because I was like, these weapons are going to kill me. So I hit Dispersion. I managed to stay alive. I'm just waiting for Fade to come back off cooldown. And I'm telling my group, because we're in voice, right? I'm telling them, I don't have Fade. I'm just going to run, basically, right? I'm telling the healer, heal me as much as you can. I have no way to get rid of threat. And I'm not going to be hitting stuff, so hopefully I start losing threat. And the tank also needs to know that so that he can be trying to get threat back on those things. And had we stunned the Animate Weapons cast, I could have avoided that entirely. That whole me almost dying problem. I'm playing Psychic Horror, so that's something I could have interrupted. But to be honest, I am just not used to interrupting that because usually the people I play with interrupt that themselves, and I don't have to worry about it. I can just worry about doing damage. But the people I'm doing this key with aren't my regular group or whatever, right? And several of the people in this key haven't done this dungeon in particular in months because we've been on farm we were on farm in Castle Nathria for like 6 months or something, and so they had no reason to do any Mythic Plus because they were already fully geared or whatever. And so several of them have forgotten or gotten rusty or whatever and didn't realize that we should have interrupted that Animate Weapons cast. We should have stunned it, right? Like we have a rogue. Rogues are really good for that. Even the tank could have done it. Or like I was saying, I could have done it. It's just that nobody realized they were supposed to, and therefore I almost died. That's something that I should have thought about as we were starting the key. And it's also something that I should have communicated as I saw the problem. I read all the nameplates of those things that were killing me, right? I was like, oh, these are animated weapons. We need to stop that cast. But instead of telling people, hey, interrupt that cast so that I don't die, instead I was just like, hey, I'm dying. Save me, basically, right? So communication, as they say, communication is key. So that's one thing that I would not take for granted. I think it's kind of underrated. The only way people can do what you want them to do or have a chance to do what you want them to do is if you tell them, right? They're not mind readers. It's not safe to assume that everybody knows everything about Mythic Plus, right? In fact, a lot of people are really put off from Mythic Plus and don't do it because of that, right? I had friends in my old guild who would, they're good players, right? They can do raids and things, and they can manage Mythic Plus just fine, but they aren't Mythic Plus players, right? So as soon as you put them into a group like a high key, where they haven't done that kind of key, right? So they don't know all the little intricacies. Um, they get like flamed by people who are like, "Yo, why didn't you kick that cast? Yo, why didn't you do X, Y, Z?" Right? And the answer is they just don't know, right? If you want them to do that, if you're trying to, uh, yeah, if you want them to do that stuff, you need to tell them. And also, I think it would go a long way for the Mythic Plus community as a whole if people were more willing to help people learn and not assume that everybody knows everything, right? There are a lot of people out there who go into a key, never say a single word, and then the key goes badly, and the person freaks out because they're like, "Yo, you're so bad at the game. You don't know that you're supposed." I had 13 HP there, by the way. They're like, "Yo, you're so bad at the game. You don't know you're supposed to kick this thing. You should have done this thing. You suck," and then they leave, right? Um, that is like super bad for Mythic Plus as a whole. It means that less people are going to be interested in doing Mythic Plus, which means that you're going to be stuck with the same pool of people for all of your keys, right? So I'll stop my rant there, but basically, um, communicate, especially in a pug group, right, with people you don't know. If you assume that everybody knows everything, it can only be bad, right? Because if you assume that people know nothing and you're telling people everything, right, to help, right, you're trying to communicate everything, then there are two cases, right? Either people do know nothing, and so you telling them is helping, or people know stuff and you telling them uh, is not taking away from anything. It's just reminding them, right? And the alternative is if you don't tell people stuff and you assume that everybody knows everything, then they either don't know everything and you're screwed because they don't know stuff and you're not telling them, right? So it just doesn't get done. Or they do know stuff, in which case you're okay, right? Because they're gonna do the stuff that you need, right? So the one case where you assume that people know nothing is a win-win, and the case where you assume that people know stuff is a win-lose, right? So you should just always go for the win-win and assume that people know nothing and try to help each other, right? That's like the whole point of my YouTube channel, right? I'm not doing this for fun or for fame or whatever. I'm just doing this to try and help people learn stuff, right? So I feel like I'll become a better Shadow Priest personally if I can teach other Shadow Priests to be better, because in the future they could potentially teach me, right? So that's the kind of attitude I'm trying to have towards the YouTube channel, but also any kind of in-game content and life in general, I guess. Um, okay, that's the end of that rant. Sorry that was so long. So going into this first boss, there's not too much to say about this guy. Pretty much everybody who has been doing Sanguine Depths in the last couple months or whatever, there are like meta strategies, right? So a lot of people will take the orbs kind of over here by the door and pull the boss away towards the other door. The severing smash is the thing. Some people will take it to that gate, right, and then pull the boss way over here so that they have time to pop the orbs before they get to the boss. And some people will try and outrange it back there. Any of that really works. What I've found to be the easiest is the gate one. You take the orbs to the gate, and then everybody runs away. But especially on a let me pause this real quick because I want to talk about these debuffs. On a fortified week like this, you can pretty much zerg the boss down pretty quick, especially if you're like really geared like us. So you don't have to worry too much about taking those orbs way out and having like a really good strategy for that, because the orbs are going to do less damage because it's fortified, not tyrannical, and the boss will die quicker, right? Because it's fortified, not tyrannical, right? Okay, so this pack right here, you'll notice there's an inspiring mob in this pack. These guys are a bunch of casters, and they'll cast this debuff on people called Rack Soul, and this thing kind of slaps, especially because it's fortified, right? So it's doing more damage than it would if it were tyrannical. This thing kind of slaps, so there's not a ton you can do about this. You could CC the inspiring guy out there and then pull everything else, and so that you have kicks for it and all that, and then finally pull the inspiring guy. That would work. Or you can do what we decided to do and just pull it all on top of each other, right? Just press W, as they say. And because we decided to do this, I should be focusing down this inspired mob so that we can start interrupting these casts as soon as possible. Like these dark bolts too, those are interruptible, but they aren't currently because of the inspired guy, and those are just going to truck our tank, right? So what I will mention, we have an advantage as a Shadow Priest in a situation like this where a lot of classes, we have something that a lot of classes don't, and that's Mass Dispel, right? So when these Rack Soul debuffs go out on people, which they are going to because of the inspired mob, you can't kill this inspired mob faster than one Racked Soul will go out or whatever. When they start going out on people, we have the advantage of being able to Mass Dispel these off, right? So what I like to do is with debuffs, magic debuffs like this, unless they're like really, really, really deadly, I try to wait until there are 3 on my raid frames, 1 on me and 2 other people, or just 3 on my friends, and then I Mass Dispel. But it also kind of depends on, like right there I Mass Dispelled just 1, because it kind of depends on how the healer is doing, how rough it's looking for the group, etc. I disperse right here because this is looking pretty sketchy. The inspired mob is still not dead, and actually everything but one other thing died before the inspired mob. So that was a case of bad target priority. You can see I did like 9.3k on that pack, which means I was probably using a lot of AoE abilities, so Shadow Crash and Searing Nightmare. I don't know if it's really worth it to just single target that guy down, right? Because we survived just fine. But it is probably worth it to cast more single target abilities into that guy rather than just pad on all the other stuff, right? Because if that guy doesn't die and they end up casting a bunch of Rack Soul on everybody and the Curse of Suppression and all this stuff, and they end up killing everybody, then all that damage that I did to everything else doesn't matter at all because we wipe, right? So that's just something to keep in mind as well. Whenever you have like a priority target that needs to die, it's kind of a fine line, right? Because all the other stuff needs to die too. So if we aren't going to wipe, then it's good that I do damage to all the other stuff as well so that it dies quicker once we have killed the inspired guy. But if I don't do damage to all that other stuff and we kill the inspired guy, if the inspired guy doesn't die, then my damage to all that other stuff, like I said, doesn't matter because we all end up dying, right? So on Sagadon, I like to take so right now I've got the Volcanic Plume and the Stone Ward. That's just because the Stone Ward is like the best defensive option in my opinion, and Volcanic Plume is really, really good on fortified weeks. And then you'll notice I'm standing back here by this like outcropping on the wall. This is because these guys will occasionally target you with different spells, and you can save your kicks. You don't have to kick them all if you just line of sight behind this wall. I probably don't end up doing it at all on this pack, but this is something I've done in previous Sanguine Depths videos. But yeah, so if this were to say Healy McHeals when this oppressor is casting this Curse of Suppression, we can just let it go off as long as I go stand behind this little outcropping and break line of sight with that guy, right? Instead, like this Curse of Suppression, I could line of sight this, but we end up just killing it. It is important that because we pop this Venthyr Lantern, the mobs do need to stay kind of up by where they are right now so that we can get the buff as we kill them in this Venthyr Lantern, right? But because we're ranged players, we can stand, pretty far away. So This Dread Bindings, we can avoid that entirely just by standing at range. Like this mage got hit by it because he was standing too close. So this pack specifically, this one and one coming up as well, any of them that cast the Dread Bindings, just stand as far away as you can without pulling other stuff, right? And then right here, things kind of go south for us again. We end up pulling the Janitor on top of this already dangerous pack, and that was an accident, I will mention. Some people might do that on purpose, but we did not, right? So now it's kind of an oh crap moment again. So I pop Vampiric Embrace, I'm Shadow Crashing, I'm Searing Nightmaring, and then I'm just going to start spamming my, I tried to kick that Curse of Suppression, but I did not get it, I don't think. And then we start, we need to kill all this stuff ASAP. We need to dodge the Janitor's sweeping thing. He's the head custodian. And then, we just gotta, blast all this stuff down. This is a good time for Fade, for Desperate Prayer. Those are two things that you should be using. Fade, especially, you should be using pretty much on cooldown, because with our Conduit Translucent Image, Fade just makes it so that you take up to like almost 10% reduced damage for 5 seconds, the first 5 seconds of Fade. And then Desperate Prayer, depending on what you're playing, right? If you're playing Karain or if you're playing Naya or whatever, depending on how many defensive conduits you have, Desperate Prayer can also be a heal, right? So Desperate Prayer by default is a heal and also a max health increase, right? It increases your maximum HP by 25% and also gives you that much health, right? But with, what's it called? Resonant Words? Is that what it's called? Something like that? There's a conduit that makes it so that your Desperate Prayer heals you for an additional amount over the next 6 seconds or something. And you want to be using your defensives, right? Press those buttons, right? Like I just faded again for the Translucent Image damage reduction. So you can, Shadow Priests are like shockingly tanky because of those things, right? We've got one of the best non-immunity defensives in the game. I also take this Champions brand on that guy every time. We got one of the best non-immune defensives in the game, like I said. Dispersion is a 75% DR. I'm doing the line of sight thing right here again, and then I end up running in. Dispersion is a 75% DR, which is huge. There are like a lot of classes that would die for that. So that's something that we can use pretty often. It's a 2-minute cooldown. But then on top of that, we've got, like I said, Translucent Image on Fade, which gives you a 10% at 226, at item level 226 conduit. It gives you like 9.6% damage reduction. And then we've also got Desperate Prayer, right? And on top of that, we also have Fey Guardians. If you're a Night Fey still, like I am, which gives you a 20% damage reduction from the Guardian Fairy. And you also have Vampiric Embrace, which will smart heal people. Actually, it's not a smart heal. It just heals an injured ally who's close, and it can heal yourself. So that's a good thing. So we have a ton of defensives, and they're all on pretty short cooldowns, right? Vampiric Embrace, I'm pretty sure, is 1.5 minutes. Dispersion's only 2 minutes. Desperate Prayer is also 1.5 minutes. And then Fade is 30 seconds. Every 30 seconds, you can take 10% less damage for 5 seconds, right? So that's pretty good. So you should be using those as often as you can. Right here, we pop the Venthyr Lantern again. We bring everything into it so that we can get the stacks. I will say that they've made this dungeon a lot easier. It's kind of a shell of what it used to be. The Vestige of Doubt guys are way, way less scary than they used to be. They used to have this this puddle that they would put on the ground that you couldn't stand in, which made it so that you had to run backwards. The Remnants of Fury used to be more dangerous. Oh, and then right here, this is a good moment to explain something. I have this red circle around me, right? This is I forget what this is called. It's, oh man, I wish I remembered. I could go back and see, but I don't want to. I don't want to make it way longer. Anyway, this it's like explosive anger, I think is what it's called. This red circle around me. Whoa, sorry about that. I didn't mean to move it like that. This red circle around me is a curse, so it can be dispelled by mages and by boomkins. So this is another moment where I assume that this is going to be dispelled off of me. I as I'm fighting right here, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be gone. I don't have to worry about the damage this is going to do because I know we have a mage in the group and mages can dispel this, right? So I'm like, it's okay. This guy's got me. I'm not going to worry about it. But like I said before, you should not assume that that's going to happen every time. So I should have played defensively, right? And popped. I have Dispersion up for this. I've almost got Desperate Prayer up for this, but it won't be up in time. So I should disperse this. But what ends up happening is I just don't, and then I hit this guy with a Shadow Word Death, which crit, and it's going to come back and hit me. I'm going to go from 34k HP to dead in like less than a second. So I get hit by my Shadow Word Death, and then that thing explodes on me, and it kills me, right? Had I known that, had I been aware enough to realize that this was going to go off on me, right? Maybe I wouldn't have Shadow Word Deathed, although I'm super aggressive with Shadow Word Death, so I probably still would have, honestly. But I definitely, if I did Shadow Word Death, I definitely should have dispersed. But instead, I end up Shadow Word Deathing, hitting myself for 12.5k, right? And then 5k from the Explosive Anger, and then another 30k from the Explosive Anger. If I were to disperse, I survive all three of these things just fine because they're doing 75% reduced damage. So it'd be like 3k, and then this thing would be like just under 7.5k or something, and I would survive that easy. But instead, I played badly, right? I was taking the tick from Explosive Anger, and then I Shadow Word Death crit myself, and I die, right? So that's something else that I should have been aware of. It's important to, I mean, that's just a great example of why you shouldn't assume that people are gonna save your life. You are the person who needs to make sure you stay alive the most, right? You staying alive should be your number one priority. It is not anyone else's number one priority, right? Even the healer's number one priority is to keep themselves alive and then keep everybody else alive, right? Because as soon as the healer dies, they can't keep anybody alive. And that should also be your number one priority. Keep yourself alive and then worry about other stuff, right? So when you see debuffs on you like that, unless you're communicating with people, I should have told him, hey, can you dispel me? And then he could have said, no, it's down, or yes, right? And if he had said, no, it's down, then I would know, oh, I should disperse this or whatever. Instead, I just didn't say anything. I assumed that he would get me, right? He didn't get me, and I ended up dying because I forgot like the number one rule of playing World of Warcraft. If you die, it's your fault. Like 99% of the time, right? I could be like, hey, what the heck, dude? Didn't you see that thing that was on me that you could have dispelled? But it is not his fault at all, right? It's by far my fault. I had ways to survive that I should have used, right? That's another little thing that I think will help a lot of people improve at the game. Improve at more than just the game. I think that's like good life advice. If I can wax philosophical again for a second. When things go badly, also let me just mention, I'm blasting right here, 23k overall, or 23k DPS during my opener. When things go badly in life, it's easy to say, oh, that's because of so-and-so, right? Man, I didn't get that job, right? I applied for a job, I interviewed, and I didn't get it. Man, that must be because the person who interviewed me didn't get me, or you know, a number of things. The dry cleaners didn't iron my shirt right, and so it was all wrinkly when I was at the interview, and that's why they didn't hire me. Those freaking dry cleaner guys, right? How dare they? When in reality, in almost all scenarios, obviously there are times where this is not the case, but in almost all cases, if things don't go the way you want them to go, it's usually because you did something suboptimally, right? So for instance, in World of Warcraft, if you don't time the key, if you don't kill the raid boss or whatever, if you lose the arena match, instead of looking for things that other people did wrong, and pointing the blame at them, that you can't change other people's actions, you can't change how other people behave, aside from talking to them about it, right? But what you can change is your own actions, right? So if you look, I feel like it's a way better approach when you realize that there was a problem or something didn't work out right. It's a much better approach to think to yourself, okay, how could I have done better, right? And then if you can honestly answer that question, if you can look at it and, be honest with yourself, be humble enough to realize that you're not perfect. There are probably almost always things you could have done better, right? If you look at yourself and you think about stuff like that, and you come back from all that analysis and you say, honestly, I actually did nothing wrong. There was actually nothing I could have done better, right? Then you can start looking at the other people and thinking, okay, how can I help them in the future to avoid, whatever mistakes they made as well. For me, when it comes to Mythic Plus like this, a moment like that where the mage could have dispelled me and I would have lived, it would probably take me... I imagine I would never go and talk to the mage and say, hey, you did this badly. Because, like I said, I had so many different options to stay alive, and even beyond all the buttons I could have pressed to stay alive, right? I could have communicated. I should have said, hey, please dispel me. Or, hey, even if I didn't tell the mage to dispel me, I could have said, hey, healer, can you watch me? Can you put sack on me? Can you put beacon on me or something to keep me alive, right? But I did none of that. So there are, probably 10 or 15 things that I could have done differently to stay alive before I start looking at what could that mage have done differently to keep me alive, right? Okay, sorry this video is turning into like a million different life lessons with Nick Knock, right? But hopefully it's not too off-putting. So that's the end of that rant. Going into this boss, there's some interesting things you can do when these different orbs come on the ground. You'll notice our mage went into ice block right there. That's because there are a certain number of orbs, right? And we have 5 players. So you can only divide however many orbs by 5, and that's the most that any one person can have, right? So what we like to do is take a player out of the equation. So instead of going, let's say there's 10 on the ground, there's more than that, but let's say there's only ever 10. If nobody uses an immunity or any kind of defensive or anything, then at most you get 10 divided by 5 and everybody gets 2, right? But if instead you're like, okay, our mage is going to ice block, or our shadow priest is going to disperse, or etc., right? You can say instead of 10 divided by 5, you can do 10 divided by 4, right? And then 3 people get 2, and 2 people get 4, right? No, 2 people get 3. Man, sorry about that. 4 people... Okay, regardless. You understand what I'm saying? It's 10 divided by 4 instead of 10 divided by 5, right? So 2 people get 2, and 2 people get 3 is what it is. So what we like to do is we rotate immunities. So the mage is going to ice block the first one, and then the second one, the tank will AMS it, or I'll disperse it, or whatever, just so that other people who aren't using an immunity can grab more of the orbs and give themselves an easier time trying to survive that mechanic, right? It helps the healer too, because then the healer doesn't have to worry about healing 4 or 5 people. They can worry about healing 1 less, right? On this cold heart guy, this biting cold thing continues even after he dies. So that's one thing to be aware of. If that's on you and he dies, spam Shadow Mend on yourself. because there's a chance your healer doesn't realize that it's still on you, and it's going to tick you, and then you're going to die. So I like to spam Shadowman on myself in that moment. On this pack, we're going to... this is one of the moments in this key where we actually CC'd the Inspired mob before we pulled everything. And then we need to watch these Rack Soul casts. I kick one right there. And then we're just going to start Searing Nightmare spamming. I popped my Mindbender for the increased Insanity generation. And I pop PI right here. Void Form Shadow Crash. 2 Mind Blasts and a Shadow Word Death right there to get 3 Rifts out of my Mindbender, because it was about to fall off and there was only like 5 or so targets, which means that it does its maximum damage, right? Because Mindbender, I get this question a lot from people. They're like, what's the AoE priority for Shadow Priest? And the answer is, it changes throughout a pull, right? So depending on how many targets you're fighting, it's better to press certain abilities. So if you're fighting 1 target, right, then it's best to press your single target abilities. But if you're fighting 3 targets, like I am right now, then it's really good to get your Mindbender out and start casting Shadow Word Deaths and Mind Blasts to try and get as many Shadow Flame Rifts off as you can. But if you have, let's say, 7 targets, then it's better to be casting your AoE abilities like Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash and stuff like that. And then when you're at those higher numbers, 10, 12 or whatever, and things start dying and you go down from 10 and 12 to 5 targets to 4 targets, you need to change your rotation. So it can be really easy to be like, okay, on this pack there's 10 targets, so I'm going to spam Searing Nightmare until everything dies. But that's actually not the best choice. You should be spamming Searing Nightmare only until you get down to a small enough number of targets where there are better options to press, right? Being, Mindbender, Shadow Word Death, Mind Blast, stuff like that. Even just regular Mind Blasts, Vampiric Touches as well. It's like you only put Vampiric Touches on stuff until you hit like 5 or 6 targets, maybe 7, and then you stop doing that. And then as you're coming back down from 10, 12, now you're at 8, now you're at 6, right? Then you can start thinking about putting on a couple more Vampiric Touches, right? So it's kind of hard to make like a video where I go in depth about what is the AoE rotation for Shadow Priest. Although I would like to make one of those, it's just kind of hard because it's not straightforward, right? For a lot of classes in World of Warcraft, you can just say, on AoE, press these buttons. On non-AoE, press these buttons. But that's it's not that straightforward for Shadow, right? Because like in this situation, I've got like 7 targets or so. I pop, I'm just Searing Nightmare spamming right here. I pop Void Form and Shadow Crash for a big crit. And then as stuff is dying right here, I start sniping it with Shadow Word Death instead of continuing to spam Searing Nightmare. Right here, there's only 2 targets. So I'm going to put Vampiric Touch on both, and then I'm going to use Shadow Word Death to try and snipe them again. And then we're back up to a really high target count, right? So I'm back to my AoE rotation. So Searing Nightmare and Shadow Crash. I also get a Mind Blast in there. And then I'm going to start, as stuff is dying, I'm going to start sniping stuff with Shadow Word Death again, right? Now we're down to, looks like 3 targets, right? I'll do a couple more Searing Nightmares, and then I'm going to go into a Mind Blast, a Vampiric Touch, a Devouring Plague, a Mind Flay, right? I'm into the single target rotation. I get another Searing Nightmare out, 2 of them, so I can dot these Gargans, and then I'm going to snipe them. And then, yeah, I'm just back to single target on this General Call. General Call runs away. We've got these 2 Gargans that we're going to try and use to refresh our buff on this Venthyr Lantern. If you want to kill stuff in this Lantern for as long as you can, because it'll refresh the uptime on this buff. And then, yeah, we're going to finish them off. And now we're going to move into what looks like... Okay, so this is another pretty big pack. So you got 5 plus 2, so this is 7. And then I've got Vampiric Void Form up for this, so I'm going to Shadow Crash, Searing Nightmare spam again. Now we're down to 3 targets, so I can put Vampiric Touch on some of these if I want. although these Gargans are pretty low HP, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then we're down to single target, so I'm going to Vampiric Touch like I just did, and then I'm going to get my Shadow Flame Rifts going, so my Shadow Word Death and my Mind Blasts, because Mindbender is active. And then I put Vampiric Touch on these two Gargans, because it's just 2 targets, right? So yeah, like I was saying, I would like to make a video where I go through and talk about when you need to start thinking about pressing different buttons, right? And like, when should you be using Searing Nightmare? When should you prioritize Mindbender and Shadow Flame Rifts and stuff like that? But as you can tell from that short, like, couple minutes of me talking, it's not super easy, and it changes over time, right? It's not super straightforward, and it changes over time. So now we're back down to 3. So I'm going to try and snipe stuff with Shadow Word Death, and that's the end of that pack, right? So now we got one more pack before the last boss. We got a bunch of Gargans, a Huntmaster, 2 Huntmasters actually. So there's only really 2 targets in here that are going to live for a significant amount of time, because all these Gargans are going to die pretty quick. So you should put Vampiric Touch on both Huntmasters, and then just worry about killing them, right? So right now I've only got Vampiric Touch on one, but yeah, I just barely put it on the other guy, and then yeah, we're gonna finish these 2 guys off. And something I will mention about that pack: whenever you have a pack like that has a couple elites and then a bunch of non-elites, like Miss Satyrna's Scythe has a bunch of pulls like that near the end. Try to Shadow Crash early, right? So that you can hit all the small stuff too. Because if you Shadow Crash after all the small stuff is dead, you're only going to hit the 2 elites, which is good, but it's less damage, right? It'll make your overall go down. That's a bit of a padding tip, right? It's not padding because all that stuff does need to die, but it is kind of padding because that stuff will die eventually. But I don't know. That's just something that I try to do, is when, like on that pack in particular, and in a bunch of the Gorm packs at the end of Miss Satyrna's Scythe, I try to Shadow Crash when all the larvae are alive, or those Gargans are alive, stuff like that, right? So then something that I try to do whenever I get this Wicked Rush on me, you can dodge this if you like do it correctly. Like right there, I didn't dodge it. What I try to do is when that Wicked Rush is coming out, I want to be moving, because if you can get out of the way from where General Call hits, you can actually, dodge it and not take the bleed or whatever. Okay, so that's the end of the key. For anybody who stuck around, thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure you leave a like. If you really liked it, feel free to subscribe. I'll hit play just so we can see what I get from the chest. Feel free to share it with your friends or whatever. Hope you guys learned something. Check the description for my Twitch and my Discord, stuff like that. If you want to, catch me when I'm streaming, or chat with me in my Discord or something, feel free to join those. And then yeah, good luck in the Sanctum of Domination, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.